Good evening and welcome to the Anglia Number Crunch tonight from Essex University. Over the next 4 weeks, we'll be looking at these spending cuts to find out exactly what they'll mean to us here in the East. Tonight, experts in family finance, employment, and one of the most respected political analysts in the country will give us their opinions and predictions. We've the results of an exclusive Anglia Tonight opinion poll revealing what you really think about the cuts and how you think it's going to affect you. And we'll be revealing which areas could be worst hit and why. But before that, let me tell you a little bit more about where we are this evening. We're at Essex University. It's home to 10,000 students. 40% of those are from overseas as well. It contributes £200 million to the local economy every single year. And it's also home to one of the finest government departments in the country, which is why we decided to kick off the Anglia Number Crunch right here. Right, let's get stuck into the analysis now, joined now by current affairs consumer expert as well, David Hughes. David, let's start off with this analysis then. We looked at areas which we thought were going to be hit hardest, but also those areas which we thought would jump back fastest as well.
We've been looking through all sorts of data. We enlisted the help of some experts in Cambridge Econometrics. They've been looking at all this data and trying to put some kind of order into it. We had a first look at it in last night's programme. Tonight, we're going to look at the detail of where will be hit hardest in the Anglia Number Crunch. Using a whole range of economic and statistical data, Cambridge Econometrics looked at every district in the Anglia region and came up with two measures. Vulnerability, the areas which might be hardest hit by the economic situation. And on the positive side, adaptability, where we'll adjust best to the changes ahead. Now, both are important so that we get a full picture. We combined them and came up with 4 categories. Now, the first 2 categories, well, they sort of even each other out. This corner of the graph, they're among the most vulnerable places like Norwich, Northampton, Milton Keynes and Peterborough. But crucially, they're places that can adapt to the new economic climate. They're resilient, if you like. Similarly, over in the top corner, not so adaptable in places like Malden, East Cambridgeshire and Babur in Suffolk, but also not so vulnerable to the cuts. So the key areas of this chart are the other corners. The best place to be is here. Least vulnerable, most adaptable. Places in and around Cambridge, East Hertfordshire and South North Hants. Now, across in the other corner, the places expected to struggle. They're the most vulnerable. Places least able to adapt. Great Yarmouth, Wellingborough, Fenland, Tendring are found here. So why the big differences? Our reporter Hannah Pettifer has been to South Cambridgeshire, but first, Elodie Harper went to the Tendring area of Essex.
Harwich, Jaywick, Clacton-on-Sea, all towns in the Tendring district of Essex which may be hardest hit.
Jaywick is the 3rd most deprived district in the country, and this region of Essex as a whole is particularly vulnerable to government cuts because of the high proportion of people employed in government services.
The rise in the number of people losing their jobs and on out-of-work benefits also make Tendring vulnerable. And the region lacks the resilience that would enable it to adapt easily to further hardship.
Scores particularly poorly on educational attainment, and so that suggests that it may have difficulty in responding to once the impact of government spending cuts comes through, may have difficulty in attracting other kinds of businesses to come. Doesn't have a strong tradition of business startups, doesn't have a lot of jobs in high tech.
Tendring Council are still hoping to secure some public money to fund regeneration here. But they say their focus is now on lobbying private companies to bring economic investment to the area. Elodie Harper, Anglia News, Jaywick in Essex.
The village of Colchester has clearly benefited over the years from its proximity to Cambridge. Just one of a number of villages in South Cambridgeshire whose population is growing. The young and the better educated attracted to jobs in the science and research industries.
It hasn't had a large increase in unemployment so far. It's not particularly exposed to government spending cuts. It has a reasonably high proportion of people in high-level occupations, so that's much better placed, it's less vulnerable, and it looks, on these measures, quite adaptable.
The Cambridge Science Park is one of many reasons why South Cambridgeshire came out so strongly. It provides hundreds of high-level jobs, but most importantly, it's a private enterprise, therefore not reliant on government funding.
South Cambridgeshire may be a beautiful part of the region. It's also a place where people choose to live and thrive. Hannah Pettifer, Anglia News, Grantchester.
So the highs and lows of that study from Cambridge Econometrics, will have more of that data over the coming weeks. We're joined here at the University of Essex by the Professor of Government here, Professor Paul Whiteley. We think of ourselves here in the east of England as being part of the prosperous southeast, but this study shows us that there are some areas of deprivation here.
Yes, it's very interesting. I mean, for example, in Great Yarmouth, 21% of people are unemployed or on benefits. And there's other pockets of deprivation in places like Southend and Ipswich and so on. So you're right. And we see ourselves as relatively prosperous, but there are areas that are going to be hit quite hard by cuts.
But there's quite a few places in our region that are quite adaptable as well. How politically is it going to play out, that mixed picture?
Well, Cambridge is a very good example because a Lib Dem MP, and here we have 41% of the population in the public sector. Now, if there's big public sector cuts, are they going to re-elect that Liberal Democrat MP in 2015? Well, maybe, maybe not.
Professor Whiteley, for now, thank you very much indeed. Of course, we've got coming up later in the programme the results of that exclusive YouGov poll that we also commissioned. Hopefully you'll come and talk to us about that too.
So, Professor, thank you very much indeed for now. Well, if you or your children are hoping to go to a university like this fine establishment here in Essex, you could be paying thousands more for your education in the future. A new review on funding says the cap on tuition fees should be lifted, freeing universities to charge what they want. Well, that would mean for some students leaving their degree courses with debts of over £40,000. Emma Baker has this report.
When Christopher Ollie arrived at Cambridge University 2 years ago, he accepted he'd be paying a high price for his degree.
By the end of this year, I'll be in £26,000 of debt, and yeah, it's terrifying because I don't know about getting on the property ladder, things like that. I mean, you've got a number above your head which dictates, you know, how much you're in debt.
But Christopher could be luckier than those who follow in his footsteps. A new review out today says the current cap on tuition fees should be lifted. At the moment, students pay £3,290 a year for tuition fees. Under these new proposals, universities could charge what they wanted to. That could be as much as £12,000 a year at top institutions such as Cambridge University. New figures show that the average first-year student will leave with more than £20,000 worth of debt. If these new plans got the go-ahead, that could soon be double.
It could frankly be a disaster. An entire generation of students could be put off applying to the best universities that they could go to because of cost. Telling someone that their university education will cost them £10,000 to £12,000 a year is an incredible deterrent, and it will hit particularly those from the poorest backgrounds.
But there are some who say this could provide new opportunities, allowing universities to continue competing in a global market.
As a country, obviously, we have universities which are in the world-leading group of universities, and it's really, really important that we are able to compete, to be able to produce the researchers, the workforce of the future.
These recommendations will be a controversial option for the government, not least because the Liberal Democrats campaigned against student tuition fees during the general election. Today's report could therefore be the first big test of this coalition. Emma Baker, Anglia News, Cambridge.
Well, we've got out of the cold for just a few minutes. Let's meet our next experts to discuss their thoughts on that worrying over mounting student debt. Michelle Slade is a personal and family finance expert from Money Facts, while Charlotte Cooper is joint MD of Cooper Lomas, one of the region's biggest independent employment agencies and consultants as well. Michelle, let's start on the question of finance. What do you make of the fact that students could be leaving university or college with debts of up to £40,000?
Well, it's quite a worrying time for them. I mean, obviously that's a large amount of debt to anybody, really. So I think people just need to obviously look at it. You know, they will have time to repay it. You know, the time to, after gone up to £21,000, so they've got more time to repay it before they have to start repaying. So I think it's just a case that people just, it's a bit worrying, but it can be sorted out quite easily.
And Charlotte, from an employment point of view, do you think we're going to see more people saying, look, I'm not going to bother with university, I don't want that kind of debt hanging over me, I'm going to try and get training in work?
Yes, I think we may. I think there's going to be two aspects. I think future employers are going to be much more tolerant about whether people have got a degree. I think they might be more flexible. But equally, if somebody does go ahead and get a degree and come through with that debt, I think they will see that there's a real sense of achievement and determination and appreciation of what they've done.
And Michelle, if they are thinking about still going ahead with university at this stage, what advice would you give anyone?
I think the thing is to start saving now if you can, make cutbacks, start putting money aside. And then when it's time to go, check out the bursaries and grants that you're eligible for, make sure you get everything that you're entitled to. And then making sure you've got the correct student current account, for example, to get the interest-free overdraft, and then just making savings where you can.
Michelle, Charlotte, thank you very much indeed for now. We'll have more from you later on in the programme. So then, as we've seen, education is likely to be hit hard, but the local government workers are also braced for bad news next week. They've been protests in Ipswich today over the cuts looming in Suffolk. Our political correspondent, Matthew Hudson, joins us now. Matt, this big squeeze is happening everywhere, isn't it now?
That's right, Jonathan, and yet at the same time, you know, we're barely out of first gear. Last week it was child benefits. Today, this huge row over university fees, and that is particularly tricky ground for our region's four Liberal Democrats because, of course, they campaign vociferously against fees in principle, never mind putting them up. Next Tuesday is the Defence Review, the day after that the full spending review, when we'll find out just how deep these cuts are going to be, and then every other government department will have to publish its own review. And we really are now seeing it trickle down to our level, if you like. It's only within the hour that Suffolk County councillors announced that it's closing a park and ride site in Ipswich, that it's going to bring in street lights that could be turned off in the early hours of the morning, and that it's basically going to contract out all of its care homes over the next couple of years. We've seen demonstrations outside County Hall in Ipswich. Yesterday there was a demonstration outside County Hall in Norfolk against problems with cuts in the fire service. You know, that it seems like the cuts are becoming like a trip to the dentist for us. In advance we think, well, it's got to be done, it might be unpleasant, but it'll be worthwhile. Once we're in the dentist's chair, it's a different matter, and I think we're going to see a lot more angry demonstrations right across our region.
All right, Matthew Hudson, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, we'll be back with more on the Anglia number crunch shortly.
Including that exclusive ITV Anglia YouGov survey, the opinion poll that tells us what you think of the coming cuts.
But first, more of the day's news from where you live, with Victoria back in the studio.